There's a special kind of hurt that doesn't come from being broke. It comes from being sized up. From watching someone you love tense their shoulders before a family dinner like they're walking into a storm they've survived too many times. And you sit there smiling, swallowing it because you don't want to make it worse, even when you know one truth could end it all. Tonight's story isn't here so we can clap when someone gets humbled, and it's not here so we can throw stones at a family that chose status over tenderness. It's a quiet invitation for Chung Ta to notice what money can't buy: respect, safety, and the simple feeling of being seen. Because this is the night a man walks into his in-laws' mansion looking like a poor, naive husband, while secretly holding $10 billion worth of shares in the company they worship. His wife thinks he's just living simply. He thinks he's protecting love. Then the dinner turns formal, the room turns cold, and an envelope slides across the table, and everything that was hidden starts to breathe. But before I share the story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say "listening" in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. Also, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like you were worth less than the person beside you, hit subscribe. Not because this is some fairy tale about money, but because this is the kind of story you don't forget once you've lived it. My name is Cassian Vale, and I never told my wife I owned the power to destroy her father's empire until the night he tried to purchase my silence. The envelope didn't slide across the table like paper. It slid like a verdict. One smooth shove from Graham Kingsley's hand and suddenly my marriage had a price tag. The dining room glowed in warm yellow light that was meant to feel inviting, but it only made everything look staged like a photo shoot for people who wanted the world to believe they were kind. The table was dark wood polished to a mirror shine. The silverware had weight to it, the kind that reminds you you're holding someone else's money. Crystal glasses stood perfectly aligned, each one centered like a soldier waiting for inspection. Across from me, Graham sat at the head like this was his boardroom and not his home, shoulders squared, chin lifted, suit jacket on even though we were eating dinner. To my right, Harper's knee kept brushing mine under the table, not by accident, by instinct, like her body was checking that I was still there. Celeste Kingsley didn't look me in the eye long enough to call it eye contact. She looked at my hands instead. Then my wrist. Then the plain watch I wore because it told time and nothing else. Her gaze lingered like a silent appraisal, like she could calculate my worth down to the penny if she just stared hard enough. Graham reached down beside his chair, pulled out a leather folder with the kind of careful control men use when they want to feel powerful, and set it on the table with a soft thud that still landed like a threat. He didn't push the folder. He pushed the envelope clipped to it, smooth, deliberate, confident, straight toward me. It slid over the cloth without catching, like this wasn't the first time he'd tried to buy a problem away. I didn't open it. I didn't even touch it. I just looked at it like it was a line drawn in ink between the life Harper and I had built and the one her parents thought they still owned. My heart beat louder than the clink of silver, louder than the small, polite sounds of a dinner that was already dead. In that moment, I knew with a clarity so sharp it almost felt calm that this was not a family meal. This was a transaction, and I was the product they thought they could return. 72 hours earlier, life had been simple in the way Harper and I made it on purpose. Morning light came through the cheap blinds in our little place up in Hyde Park, turning dust in the air into something almost pretty. Harper stood barefoot on the kitchen tile in one of my old t-shirts, hair still damp, making coffee like it was a ritual that could protect us from everything outside those walls. I closed my laptop, slid it into my beat-up backpack, and set it beside the door. My car keys, old Subaru keys with a scuffed plastic fob, sat in a ceramic bowl we'd bought at a weekend market because Harper liked the glaze. Harper checked her calendar on her phone while the coffee dripped. She talked about the community meetup she was hosting in East Austin, about a family she'd been trying to help get back on their feet, about donors who wanted results but hated the word need. She lived for other people in a way her family never understood, like the whole point of having anything was to give it away before it spoiled you. I listened, nodded, asked the right questions, and kept my own life quiet. I kept everything just enough. A normal apartment, normal dinners, normal weekend trips that never required passports. Not because I couldn't do more, because I could do almost anything, but because I wanted our love to have room to breathe without being crushed under the weight of what money does to people. Harper had grown up with rooms she didn't use and closets full of clothes she didn't choose. With me, she chose the small life. She chose the quiet. And I made damn sure it stayed hers to choose. That's why the text message hit her like a bruise the moment she read it. She didn't even say it out loud at first. She just slid her phone across the counter to me like the screen itself was too heavy to hold. It was from Celeste. 4 clipped sentences that carried the full weight of Westlake Hills behind them. Friday. Dinner. Just the 4 of us. Important. Harper's face changed the second her eyes hit that last word. Important. In the Kingsley family vocabulary, important didn't mean heartfelt. It didn't mean vulnerable. It meant planned, scripted, controlled. It meant someone had already decided how the night was supposed to end, and just needed the rest of us to play our parts. Harper blew out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. "I don't want to go," she said, voice tight. Or, "I don't want you to have to go." Then she looked at me with that mix of love and anger I'd seen too many times after too many family gatherings. "I'm not doing that thing again where they make you feel small. I can't watch it." I kept my voice neutral the way you do when you're steadying the other person's panic with your own calm. "We're going," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I felt the weight of them settle behind my ribs. Harper's eyes flashed. "Why?" "So they can take turns poking at you like it's sport." I didn't answer with pride. I answered with something colder, something calculated. "Because I want to see how they treat a man they think is poor and naive," I said. "I want to see how far they'll go when they believe they have all the power." Harper stared at me like she was trying to read the part of me I kept locked away, the part that didn't flinch. "Cassian," she said, soft now. "Sometimes I hate them for what they turn me into. I become this obedient version of myself the second I step in their house." She swallowed. "I don't want that version of me anymore." I wanted to tell her the truth right then. That if her father ever tried to push too far, I could end him with a phone call. That the Kingsley name, the Kingsley money, the Kingsley empire, so much of it rested on shares they didn't control anymore. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't trust Harper. Because I did. I trusted her with my heart, with my life, with the quiet parts of me I didn't show the world. I couldn't tell her because I needed to protect one thing I'd never been able to buy: certainty. I needed her to know without any doubt she loved me when she thought I was just a guy with a laptop and a car that rattled when the AC kicked on. I needed to know she chose me when there was nothing to gain, and I needed her to see her family clearly with her own eyes, not through a story I told her after the fact. People like Graham and Celeste could fake kindness when they thought it mattered. They could perform acceptance if it kept their image intact. But when they believed no one was keeping score, when they believed I was just some harmless husband they could shove aside, that was when their real faces came out. So I swallowed the truth and let it sit in my chest like a stone. I thought about Elliot Marlowe, my attorney, about the web of entities and signatures and filings that had been built over years with one purpose: keep my name off the front page while my influence quietly grew. Only a handful of people knew what I actually held. Elliot knew, my advisors knew, no one else. Not Graham, not Celeste, not even Harper. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't warn anyone. I let the invitation stand. I let the trap set itself. Friday crept closer the way storms do in Texas, hot and bright, right up until the moment the sky changes color. The night before, Harper stood in front of our closet and changed outfits like she was trying to solve a puzzle with fabric. She wanted to respect them without begging. She wanted to look like herself without giving them an opening. She pulled a dress out, held it up, shook her head, tossed it on the bed. Another dress. Another rejection. Her jaw was clenched. Her hands trembled just slightly when she reached for the hanger again. "They make me feel 16, she said, voice small and furious at the same time. I hate that. I stepped behind her, wrapped my hands around her waist, and rested my chin on her shoulder. "You don't owe them anything," I said. She leaned back into me like she wanted to believe it. When she finally picked something simple but sharp elegant, without screaming for approval, she turned and looked at me like she was bracing for battle. I glanced at the ceramic bowl by the door, the battered keys inside it, the tiny, ordinary life we'd built together. Then I looked at Celeste's message again. Important. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second like I could erase the whole night just by refusing to respond. Instead, I set the phone down. I picked up my keys. If they wanted to test the limits of who they thought I was fine, I would let them. I would let them show us everything. There's a version of this story that makes me sound like a mastermind, like I spent years planning a trap for my wife's family. That's not what happened. The truth is messier, quieter, and way more human. I didn't buy into Kingsley Land and Development because I had some romantic fantasy about humiliating Graham Kingsley at a dinner table one day. I bought into KLD because I could read numbers the way some people read faces, and 8 years ago those numbers were screaming. Austin was changing. Everyone could feel it. The tech wave was rolling in, money was flooding the city, and developers like Graham were expanding like they couldn't imagine the tide ever turning. But I was 23, fresh enough to be hungry and stubborn and obsessed with the places where confidence turns into recklessness. Back then, I lived in a cramped apartment with a desk that doubled as my kitchen table. I spent nights staring at spreadsheets, tracing debt covenants like fault lines, watching cash flow leak out of companies the way blood leaks out of a wound you keep pretending isn't there. Kingsley Land and Development had the kind of assets investors killed for land in the right corridors, properties with real demand, projects that could have been gold. But their capital structure was a disaster. Debt stacked on debt. Timelines that assumed perfect conditions. A leadership style that relied on charm and intimidation instead of discipline. Graham wasn't stupid. He was worse than stupid. He was certain. And certainty makes men do reckless things with other people's money. Then my grandfather died and left me an inheritance that could have bought me a better life overnight if I cared about appearances. Most people would have upgraded everything. New car, new apartment, new clothes. Some version of success you can take pictures of. I didn't. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't move into a high-rise. I took that money and I did what I'd always done. I put it to work in silence. I created VLT Capital. Just letters on paper, a legal shell built to keep my name out of sight, and I started buying KLD shares in small bites. I did it patiently, quietly, like a hunter who doesn't need to brag about what he's tracking. I bought enough to have a voice without making noise. I used layers of entities, careful filings, and intermediaries that made the ownership impossible to trace back to Cassian Vale unless you were looking with the right keys. Graham never looked. He just kept taking the oxygen that kept his empire breathing. The first year I bought enough to matter, but not enough to be noticed. The second year I made sure I had influence without being visible. By years 3 and 4 I'd crossed into territory where decisions I made, quiet votes, strategic pressure. The right kind of capital at the right kind of moment could shape what happened without my face ever showing up in the room. And before I ever met Harper, I already held a stake big enough to force change if Graham lost control. Today that stake is worth around $10 billion. $10 billion. I've seen people say numbers like that and smile like it means they've won life. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like responsibility that never sleeps. And it's exactly why my life stayed small on purpose. Money that loud attracts people who only know how to hear one thing. Harper didn't come into my life as part of any plan. She crashed into it like sunlight, unexpected and warm when I'd gotten too used to the cold glow of screens. We met at a charity event downtown, one of those polished Austin fundraisers where the drinks are overpriced, the speeches are rehearsed, and everyone is scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Harper was there because Celeste dragged her because the Kingsleys had a reputation to maintain. I was there because a client I respected was being recognized, and showing up mattered. At some point, we both ended up at the edge of the crowd near the bar, half laughing at the same shallow conversation we'd just escaped. Harper had this deadpan way of watching people perform themselves. She leaned close and imitated her mother's social voice so perfectly I almost spit out my drink. I admitted I had no idea what half the forks were for at the plated dinner tables. She laughed, really laughed, and for 3 hours the rest of the room didn't matter. She warned me before she gave me her number. Not in a dramatic way, in a tired way. My family is intense about money, she said. Status, all that. Then she looked straight at me like she was offering an exit. If that's going to be a problem, tell me now. I didn't tell her the whole truth. I told her the only truth that mattered. Money doesn't make someone worth loving, I said. Character does. She watched me for a beat like she was deciding whether to believe that a man could really mean it. Then she nodded like she'd been waiting her whole life to hear someone say it without trying to sell her something. We moved fast, not because I was reckless, because she was real. Because the quiet part of me that never relaxed around anyone else relaxed around her. When I proposed, Celeste tried to turn it into a negotiation, tried to turn the wedding into a showcase. Harper shut it down. She wanted a small ceremony, 50 people, people who actually mattered. Graham gave a toast that sounded polite if you didn't know how to listen, but the disappointment was underneath every word. It wasn't that he didn't like me. It was that he didn't respect the idea of his daughter choosing anything outside his script. Harper's choice was a threat to his identity. And he responded the way men like him always do, by trying to rewrite the story until he was in control again. Our life after the wedding was ordinary in the best way. We rented instead of bought. We cooked at home. We went to the farmer's market and argued about which peaches were worth it. Harper worked long hours at her nonprofit and came home smelling like the outside world's sun-dust cheap office coffee, while I sat at my desk running models and advising clients who thought they were smarter than everyone else because they had money. Harper never complained about the apartment. She never made me feel like she was settling, but I could see the strain her family put on her. Every time we drove up to Westlake Hills, her shoulders rose like she was bracing for impact. The Kingsleys didn't attack with fists. They attacked with polish, with smiles that didn't reach the eyes, with comments that sounded harmless if you didn't know they were knives. Thanksgiving was the worst. Graham would corner me in the living room with a glass of whiskey and explain real estate development to me like I was a kid who'd wandered into the wrong room. He'd talk about projections and debt and market cycles, and the whole time my mind would be correcting his numbers, fixing his logic, seeing exactly where his arrogance was going to cost him. I'd nod, ask a polite question, let him feel superior. Because the truth was, the man lecturing me only had a company to lecture from. Because my money had kept him alive through downturns he pretended to outsmart. At a BBQ out on Lake Travis, one of Harper's cousins asked what I made in a year like it was normal dinner conversation. Before I could answer, Celeste swooped in with a laugh and said, "Oh, Cassian does something with data like she couldn't even be bothered to remember." Then she mentioned Preston Shaw, Harper's ex, like it was casual. "Preston just opened a new office," she said. "He's doing so well. Such a driven young man." Harper's smile went tight. I felt her hand find mine under the table grip hard. The point wasn't Preston. The point was reminding Harper there was a better life she was supposed to want, and reminding me that in their eyes, I wasn't it. Graham's birthday was its own kind of humiliation. They seated me like an accessory, not quite at the center, not quite included in the real conversation. The men talked business and deals like they were swapping war stories, and every time I offered an opinion, there was a pause just long enough to make it clear my voice had to earn permission. Harper sat stiff beside me, cheeks flushed with anger she couldn't release in front of her parents. Celeste made one of her sweetest-sounding comments of the night, the kind that could pass for kindness if you didn't know the intent. "Harper has sacrificed so much," she said, looking at her daughter. "She could have had a life more fitting." The words landed and stayed. Harper's jaw tightened. Mine didn't move. Because if I reacted, I'd be playing the role they wanted, emotional, defensive, insecure. And I wasn't going to give them that. What they didn't understand was that I was measuring them the whole time. Not their money, their character. How they treated the person they claimed to love when she didn't obey. How they treated the man she chose when they assumed he had no power. Harper asked me once on the drive home from a brutal holiday dinner, voice shaking, "Why do you let them do that?" I kept my eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "Because their opinion doesn't change who I am," I said. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was watching, waiting, learning how far they'd go. And then a few nights before Celeste's important dinner, something happened that made my stomach go cold in a way their insults never had. I have a secondary inbox I use for monitoring business chatter, nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just the kind of information that floats around when you're close enough to capital to feel the heat. An internal email landed there by mistake, forwarded through a chain that shouldn't have touched my inbox at all. The subject line was bland on purpose. Restructuring considerations. The language inside was careful, corporate, polished. But one phrase jumped off the screen and grabbed me by the throat. To avoid leaks, we need family alignment. Family alignment. That wasn't investor language, that was Kingsley language. That was Graham blending his home life and his company life like they were the same thing, like people were tools and loyalty was something you could demand. I didn't have proof that Celeste and Graham were behind that email, but I didn't need a confession to recognize the smell of a plan. They were setting something up. Something that needed Harper compliant and quiet. Something that needed alignment. And suddenly that Friday dinner wasn't just about my worth as a husband. It was about control. About keeping their empire stable by tightening their grip on the one person in their orbit who still had a conscience. I sat at my desk and stared at that email until the screen blurred. Then I called Elliot Marlowe. I didn't give him drama, I gave him facts. There are signs they're going to try to force paperwork, I said. Get the ownership file and voting rights ready. Don't do anything until I tell you. Elliot didn't ask why. He didn't question my instincts. He just said, calm as a surgeon, I've been ready for a long time. Harper came into the room after I hung up, still holding her phone like it was burning her palm. I hate how I turn into that obedient daughter the second I'm around them, she admitted, voice low. I hate feeling like I'm 12 again. I wanted to tell her everything. To put the truth in her hands and say, you're safe. They can't touch you the way they think they can. But I also knew what the truth would do. It would turn every memory into a question. Every smile into suspicion. Did he marry me or for the power? Even if she told herself she believed me, there would always be that tiny needle of doubt. And I couldn't stand the idea of planting that in her. So I made my decision. We were going to that dinner. If Graham and Celeste were decent people, if they could treat me like family even when they thought I was nobody, then maybe there was a future where I told Harper the truth, gently, safely in our own home. But if they were going to reveal what they really were, if they were going to try to buy me, threaten her, trap us with paper, then Harper needed to see it with her own eyes. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because she deserved clarity. That night, Elliot sent me a message so short it felt like a blade. If they hand you documents, don't sign anything. Just tell me the name of the paperwork. I stared at it for a long moment, then locked my phone and set it face down. Harper got another message from her mother almost immediately after, as if Celeste could sense the shift in the air. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. Dress appropriately. Harper read it and laughed once, no humor, just disbelief. They can't help themselves, she said. I looked around our small living room at the thrift store lamp Harper loved, at the stack of donated books she was organizing for a community program, at the life we built without spectacle. Then I looked at her, standing there with that familiar mix of fear and fury. I understood it fully in that moment. Friday wasn't a dinner, it was a stage. And the Kingsleys had already set their props. Friday came in hot and bright the way Austin always does, like the city was trying to pretend nothing ugly ever happens here. Harper started getting ready hours too early, not because she had time to kill, but because indecision is what anxiety looks like when it puts on lipstick. She pulled one dress off the hanger, held it up to her body, frowned, and tossed it onto the bed. Too simple and they'd treat her like she'd fallen off their map. Too nice and they'd accuse her of trying to crawl back into their world. She changed earrings 3 times, then stood in front of the mirror with her hands on the counter like she was bracing for impact. I kept my own outfit, boring on purpose khakis, a button-down, nothing that signaled power, nothing that signaled defiance either. The uniform of a man they could dismiss. The uniform of the role they'd already assigned me. Harper looked at me while she zipped up her dress, and her eyes had that familiar mix of anger and fear. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked. The question wasn't really about dinner. It was about whether I was willing to walk back into the place that always made her feel small. I stepped closer, fixed the collar of my shirt, and kept my voice steady. "I want you to be left alone after this," I said. "To get there, we have to go through tonight." Harper swallowed like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to protect me, but her phone buzzed before she could. She glanced at the screen, and I watched the color drain out of her face so fast it scared me. "It's Talia," she said, already sounding exhausted. She answered on speaker without thinking because part of her still wanted to believe family calls were innocent. Talia's voice came through bright and sugary, the kind of tone people use when they're about to hand you a blade and want you to thank them for it. "Hey," she sang, just wanted to say, "tonight's gonna be interesting. Like you might want to emotionally prepare." Harper's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" There was a pause, a tiny stumble, like Talia had said too much too soon. Nothing she said quickly. Just, "You know Uncle Graham when he gets formal. He's been, planning." Harper didn't let her off the hook. Planning what? Talia, another pause. Then the slip. "I mean, I heard he asked the family attorney to come by early," Talia said, trying to sound casual, failing. "But I'm sure they won't sit at the table. It's probably just paperwork stuff. Don't freak out." Harper's hand tightened around the phone like she wanted to crush it. "They invited a lawyer," she said, voice sharp now. "You're telling me my parents invited a lawyer to dinner?" Talia tried to laugh it away. "It's not like that, it's just, you know how they are. I gotta go. Love you." The line went dead. Harper stared at the blank screen for a second, then looked up at me with something close to panic. "They invited a lawyer, Cassian," she said. "This isn't dinner." I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hit me, because it confirmed exactly what my gut had been warning me about since that stray email. I stepped toward her, took the phone gently from her hand, and set it down on the counter like I was trying to lower the temperature in the room. "Okay," I said. "Then we treat it like it's not dinner." Harper's breath came out shaky. "What does that even mean?" I met her eyes. "It means you don't let them rush you," I said. "It means you watch, you listen, and you remember that you're not a child in their house anymore." Harper blinked hard, fighting tears she didn't want to give me. "I hate that you have to go through this because of me," she whispered. That one landed deeper than Talia's call, because Harper wasn't dramatic. When she said things like that, she meant them from the bottom of her chest. I took her hands in mine and squeezed. "I'm going through it because I chose you," I said. "But I'm not letting anyone turn our marriage into something they can buy, sell, or cancel." Harper shook her head like she wanted to believe me but didn't know what to do with the fear. "If they bring papers," she said, "I don't know if I can keep my cool." I kept my face calm even though my mind was already counting exits. "If they bring papers, don't panic," I told her. "Just observe." Harper stared at me. "Why are you talking like you knew this was coming?" I didn't answer directly. I gave her the only thing I could without cracking open the truth. Because sometimes the safest way through a fire is to see where the flames are before you run, I said. She searched my face. "What are you preparing?" Her voice wasn't accusing. It was pleading. I let a small silence sit there because lies come easy when you fill every gap. "A truth will show up at the right time," I said. "Not because I'm hiding things from you to hurt you. Because I want you to be protected by what's real, not trapped by what they pretend is real." Harper's jaw clenched. She didn't like that answer, but she took it because there was no time left to wrestle it into something cleaner. We walked out to the parking lot and I grabbed the keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. The little scuffed fob felt heavier than it ever had, like even the simple parts of our life were bracing for what was coming. Harper slid into the passenger seat and buckled up too fast, like she wanted to lock herself down. We drove west toward the hills, toward the neighborhoods where the streets get quieter and the houses get bigger, and the air starts to feel like it belongs to a different kind of person. Austin's skyline shrank behind us. Westlake Hills rose ahead like a wall. The closer we got, the more Harper's silence filled the car. After a few minutes, she spoke without looking at me. "Every time we go there," she said, "I feel like I'm walking into a courtroom where they're both the judge. I kept my eyes on the road. Then tonight I said, you remember you're allowed to object. Harper let out a humorless laugh. They don't let me object. They don't get to decide what you're allowed to do anymore, I said. And I meant it. We turned onto their street, and the world changed. Gates, stone walls, landscaping so perfect it didn't look alive. Their home didn't look like a place people lived. It looked like a monument to winning. The driveway curved like it was designed to force you to slow down and feel the weight of it. Harper's hand found mine for a second, squeezed hard, then let go like touching me made it too real. We parked. The house loomed, and when the door opened, Celeste Kingsley was standing there herself, not the housekeeper, not an assistant. That was the first sign she intended to control the night from the first breath. Harper, darling, she said, pulling her daughter into an embrace that was careful enough not to disturb her hair. Then Celeste's eyes slid to me and her mouth formed my name like it was something she'd agreed to tolerate. Cassian, polite, cold, precise. Not an insult anyone could quote, but sharp enough to cut if you were the one hearing it. Graham was already at the table when we entered the dining room. Suit on, cufflinks, sitting at the head as if the furniture itself had been built for him. He stood just long enough to shake my hand, grip firm, smile thin. Good of you to join us, he said, like I'd been invited instead of summoned. The meal began with a kind of false normal that felt more unsettling than outright hostility. Celeste asked Harper about her nonprofit the way someone asks about a hobby they don't respect but want to appear supportive of. So she said, cutting her food delicately, how are your programs going? Are donors still interested? Interested. Not helpful. Not moved. Interested like people in need were a market segment. Graham talked about a new project north of Austin, throwing around words like premium trophy legacy and partners with the casual confidence of a man used to being admired. I played my part. I asked just enough questions to sound engaged without revealing I understood the machinery underneath. I nodded at the right moments. I let Graham feel like he was educating me. Harper barely ate. Her fork hovered. Her shoulders stayed tense. And then the timing shifted. Plates were cleared. The room quieted the way it does when a meeting is about to start. Graham didn't rush. He waited, savoring control. Celeste dabbed her lips with her napkin, straightened her spine, and her eyes sharpened like she'd practiced what she was about to say. Harper's hand slid under the table and grabbed mine, her grip suddenly desperate. Celeste spoke first. We want to talk about Harper's future, she said, voice smooth as glass. Graham reached down beside his chair and pulled out the leather folder. He set it on the table and the sound wasn't loud, but it made Harper flinch. Then he slid the envelope toward me, slow and confident, like he'd already decided how this ended. I didn't open it. I didn't even lift it. I looked down at the envelope, then up at Graham's face. I saw certainty there. I saw the smug peace of a man who believed money ends conversations. I set my fingertip on the edge of the paper and kept my voice calm in my head, even as my pulse climbed. If they chose to make this a purchase, I thought they were about to activate the one thing they feared without even realizing it. The envelope sat between us like a loaded question. Harper's fingers were still wrapped around mine under the table, her grip tight enough to hurt, like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. Graham watched my hands like he expected a tremor. Celeste watched my face like she expected gratitude. I didn't give either of them what they wanted. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I looked at Graham and asked evenly, "What is this?" I didn't ask like a man begging for clarity. I asked like a man forcing him to name the thing he was doing out loud in front of his daughter. Graham's jaw flexed. He didn't like being questioned in his own house. "We're going to be direct," he said, adopting that boardroom tone that made everything sound reasonable if you didn't listen too closely. Celeste leaned in with the softer blade. "It's for Harper," she said. "For her future." Harper's head snapped toward her mother. "My future is sitting right here," she said, voice shaking. Graham didn't look at her. He kept his attention on me as if Harper was background noise in a conversation about assets. I picked up the envelope without haste, pulled the flap open, and slid the contents out slowly, keeping my expression blank. Paper rustled. That sound felt obscene in a room that was supposed to be family. I read the top page without moving my lips, letting the words land inside me first. Annulment agreement. The title alone was a punch. Not divorce, not counseling, not a conversation. An eraser. A clean wipe. I flipped to the next sheet and saw the check clipped neatly to the front, bold numbers printed like a statement, $500,000. $500,000. It was meant to look generous. It was meant to look like a lifeline. It was meant to make me feel small enough to take it. I didn't react. I kept reading because the people who think they're clever always hide their worst intentions in the fine print. Under the main agreement was an appendix, smaller font, tighter margins, the kind of page most people skip because their pride won't let them admit they don't understand legal language. I read it anyway, line by line, while my heartbeat stayed loud in my ears. Confidentiality, non-disparagement, a prohibition on contacting Harper for a defined period. And then the part that turned my stomach colder than the rest, a release clause drafted like I was a threat, like the Kingsleys needed legal protection from me after they bought me off. It framed our marriage as a risk exposure. It framed Harper as a resource to be reclaimed. I felt Harper shift beside me as she realized this wasn't just a cruel gesture, it was a cage built out of paper. Celeste spoke as if she were explaining something kind. "It's cleaner this way," she said. "No ugliness, no drawn-out mess. Just a mutual acknowledgement that this wasn't the right fit." Harper's voice cut in. Mutual. Celeste's eyes flickered, but her tone stayed smooth. "Sweetheart, we're trying to help you." Graham finally spoke again, and the confidence in his voice made my skin crawl. "You married above your station," he said to me like he was stating the weather. "That's not an insult. It's reality. Harper could have had any life she wanted. We watched her trade it in. We won't keep standing by while she suffers because of sentiment." Harper shoved her chair back an inch, incredulous. "Suffers," she repeated. Graham raised a hand the way he did when he wanted a room to obey. "Let me finish." Then Celeste delivered the sentence that made Harper go rigid. "If this ends quickly," she said, "Harper can get back on track." On track. The phrase wasn't just insulting. It was familiar. It was the same language Celeste used when Harper was a teenager and wanted to take art classes instead of business electives. The same language she used when Harper wanted to move to Austin and work in community programs instead of joining a family foundation board. On track meant under control. I watched Harper's face tighten, the pain, old and fresh at the same time. Graham leaned forward, voice lowering like he was offering a secret. "You need to think about your nonprofit," he said to Harper, finally looking at his daughter the way a man looks at leverage. "The donors you rely on, the circles you move in. People talk. People judge. If you keep dragging your life through questionable choices, support dries up. That's not a threat. It's how the world works." The words were dressed up as realism, but I heard what they were: comply, or we'll starve the parts of your life you built without us. And that was the moment I understood the scope. They weren't just trying to remove me. They were trying to snap Harper back into the mold, lock her future behind gates only they had the keys to. I set the papers down neatly, palms flat for a second, as if I were steadying the table itself. Then I looked at Graham. "If you actually cared about Harper," I said quietly, "why is your first move a check to me instead of a question to her?" Graham's eyes narrowed. "This is between you and us," he said. I didn't let him frame it that way. I turned to Celeste. "Are you protecting Harper?" I asked, "or are you protecting your image in front of your friends in Westlake Hills?" Celeste's lips tightened. She hated being called what she was. "We're protecting our daughter," she insisted, voice still controlled but thinner now. I stayed calm. Calm is a weapon when people expect you to beg. "Then ask her what she wants," I said. Harper's voice broke through, raw and furious. "I want you to stop treating my marriage like a mistake you can fix with paperwork," she said. "I want you to stop acting like you own me." Graham's face hardened. "Sit down," he snapped. Harper didn't. "No," she said. "You don't get to do this." Graham's voice turned colder, the mask slipping. "The adults are talking." He said the same sentence Harper had been hearing her whole life whenever she tried to have a will of her own. I watched Harper flinch, not because she was weak, but because the old wound knew exactly where it lived in her body. And then Graham reached to his side and placed another folder on the table that hadn't been in the envelope. He slid it toward me with a small, satisfied look, like he'd been waiting to play this card. "We did our homework," he said. "Because frankly, we don't know who you really are." I opened it and saw what he meant, a background report formatted like something a corporate security firm would hand over. Some of it was accurate, my education, my job title, old addresses. But the way it was arranged was the point. A highlight on modest income assumptions. Notes about company registrations without context. References to shell entities described as unexplained. A subtle suggestion that I was slippery, dangerous, a man without a clear origin story. Celeste looked at Harper with practiced sorrow. "We've tried to understand," she said. "But we don't really know him, sweetheart." Harper's gaze snapped to me, and there it was, the crack they were aiming for. Not mistrust, not yet. Fear. The fear that she might have built her life on a man she didn't fully understand. "Cassian," she said softly, and the way she said my name hurt more than Graham's insult. "Is there something you haven't told me I didn't answer with the full truth?" Not in that room. Not with those eyes watching her. Not with those hands ready to weaponize anything I revealed. I answered the way I'd answered everything tonight, by refusing to let them control the shape of the conversation. I looked at Graham. "You hired people to dig through my life," I said. "But you didn't once sit across from your own daughter and ask her if she's happy." Graham scoffed. "Happiness doesn't pay the bills," he said. Harper laughed, once sharp and broken. "You think this is about bills," she snapped. Celeste's voice turned soothing, as if Harper were a child having a tantrum. "Sweetheart, don't be dramatic," she said. "We're offering solutions. Solutions. Like love was a math problem, and I was a variable they could remove." I kept my tone level. "Your solution starts with erasing Harper's choice," I said. "That's not protection. That's control." Graham leaned back, eyes hard. "Call it what you want," he said. "We're preventing a disaster." He tapped the check as if it were the end of the conversation. $500,000, he said to me, confident again. "Sign, take it, and go build whatever little life you want somewhere else." The arrogance of it was almost impressive. He truly believed money was gravity, that I would fall where he pointed. Harper's breathing turned fast beside me, and I could feel her shaking, caught between rage at them and fear of what she might learn about me. I slid the papers back into the envelope, carefully smoothing the edges, as if I were folding up an insult so it wouldn't cut her any further. Then I set the envelope down. I didn't touch the check. I didn't touch the pen. I looked at Graham and spoke with a calm that made even Celeste's eyes narrow. "Before I respond," I said, "I need to confirm something." Graham's chin lifted. What I held his gaze. "Who drafted this entire package?" The question landed like a stone. Graham's eyes flicked not to me, not to Harper, to the doorway of the dining room. It was a quick glance, automatic, like someone checking for a cue. Harper saw it too. I felt her fingers tighten around mine again under the table. The room went quiet in a different way now. Not the quiet before a lecture. The quiet before a door opens. Graham's mouth was already forming the next insult, that familiar, confident curl of a man who thought a dining table could be turned into a guillotine if he said the right words with enough authority. I didn't let him finish. I set my phone flat on the dark wood right beside the envelope and the pen, and I looked at him like I was done debating anything that couldn't be measured. "If you want to speak in paperwork and power," I said, my voice steady, almost quiet, "then I'll answer in the only language you actually respect." His eyes narrowed. Celeste's chin lifted a fraction, as if she were preparing to watch me beg. Harper stood frozen beside my chair, shoulders tight, her eyes moving between me and her parents like she was caught in a storm with no shelter. Graham leaned forward, ready to press the advantage one last time. "You think you can threaten me in my own house?" he started. That was the moment I pressed the speaker button. The small icon lit up and suddenly the room belonged to someone other than Graham Kingsley. "Elliot," I said, calm enough that it sounded like a meeting had simply begun. "You're on speaker. Read the current ownership structure of Kingsley Land and Development." Elliot Marlowe's voice came through clean and controlled, professional, to the point of being almost cold. "Understood. As of close of business today, Kingsley Land and Development has 100 million shares outstanding. The largest shareholder is VLT Capital, holding 47 million shares representing 47% of the company." For a half second, Graham didn't react. It was like his brain refused to translate the words into meaning. Then his face tightened. "Stop," he snapped. "What is this? This is some stunt." Elliot didn't pause. "The next largest shareholder is Graham Kingsley, personally holding approximately 19 million shares, representing 19%. The remaining 34% is held by institutional investors and individual shareholders." Celeste's posture shifted. That was the first crack. She knew numbers. She knew the hierarchy of a room, and she understood instantly what it meant for a single entity to hold 47%. Harper's lips parted slightly, confusion and shock blending into something sharper. "VLT Capital," she whispered, like she was trying to place a name she'd never heard but somehow felt close to. Graham's chair scraped as he pushed back, half standing now, anger rising like heat. "Elliot Marlowe," he said, his voice going hard. "I don't know who you are, but you're going to regret inserting yourself into a private family matter." Elliot's tone didn't change. "This is not a family matter, Mr. Kingsley. This is corporate governance." I kept my eyes on Graham. "Elliot," I said, "one more thing. Who owns VLT Capital?" The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. "VLT Capital is a privately held investment entity," Elliot said, "wholly owned by Mr. Cassian Vale. It was established several years ago and has been the primary vehicle through which Mr. Vale has accumulated his position in Kingsley Land and Development." Celeste went visibly pale. Not performative pale. Real pale. Like the blood left her face because her body finally accepted what her mind had been resisting. Harper turned toward me so fast it was almost a flinch. Her eyes were wide, glossy, and furious all at once. Graham stared at the phone as if it had grown teeth. "That's impossible," Graham said, but the certainty had drained out of him. "VLT is a fund, a firm. He stopped. Because he knew. He'd never asked. He'd never wanted to know. The money had shown up when he needed it. That had been enough. "Elliot," I said, keeping my voice steady, "give them the valuation." "Based on the last closing price," Elliot replied, "Mr. Vale's holdings in Kingsley Land and Development are valued at approximately $10 billion. Harper's breath left her lungs like a punch had landed. She put a hand to the edge of the table, steadying herself. I saw the pain in her face before I saw anything else. 3 years of her worrying about grocery budgets, about keeping our life reasonable, about whether she was dragging me down in her family's eyes. 3 years of her apologizing for them, trying to shield me, blaming herself. And here I was, holding a truth big enough to bend the entire city around it. Graham's voice cracked into something raw. 10 billion, he repeated, not even talking to us anymore, talking to the universe as if it had betrayed him. Then his eyes snapped back to me, and in that look I watched a man's identity start to crumble. "You," he said, the word loaded with disbelief and sudden fear. "You're telling me you've been—" "I'm telling you. I said that you slid a $500,000 check across this table and thought you were buying my marriage like it was a problem line item." I picked up the check with 2 fingers, holding it up under the warm light they'd chosen to make everything look expensive. 500,000, I said softly. "That's what you think Harper and I are worth." Celeste found her voice thin and shaking. "Cassian, why would you live like this? Why would you let us?" She couldn't even finish the sentence, because the answer wasn't about money, it was about who they were. Graham tried to grab the conversation back like he'd grabbed every room his whole life. "This is deception," he said louder now. "This is fraud. You—" "It's not deception," Elliot cut in, still flat, still factual. Mr. Vale's holdings are lawful, properly disclosed in the appropriate filings through the entity structure. Your company has been aware of VLT Capital as a shareholder for years. The only thing you were unaware of was the beneficial owner's identity. Graham's hands flexed at his sides. You think this gives you the right to gives me the right to speak in the same language you just tried to use against me, I said. Paper, power, control. I let that settle, then leaned in, slightly lowering my voice. And you want to know the part that should bother you most? I didn't come here to do this. You forced it. You made this a legal ambush. You threatened Harper's work. You tried to break her down into a compliant version of herself. So now we're done pretending. I turned my head just enough to meet Harper's eyes. She was staring at me like she was looking at a stranger wearing my face. The hurt there was sharp and justified. Harper, I said, voice softer now, I know you're angry. Angry? She echoed, voice trembling. Cassian, I have been terrified for years that I was dragging you into my family's cruelty. I've lost sleep over money, over whether we'd ever be okay, over whether you resented me, and you watched me do that. I watched you love me without conditions, I said. That's what I held on to. And I needed you to know it was real. Not because I wanted to test you, because I didn't want this. I gestured toward her parents, toward the table, toward the envelope to poison what we have. If I told you early, everything would become suspect. Every kind thing I did could be questioned. Every hard moment could be rewritten as strategy. I needed us to be us first. Harper's eyes filled, but her jaw stayed tight. And you needed me to see them, she said, voice breaking. You needed me to watch my own parents do this. I needed you to see the truth with your own eyes, I admitted, because they would have told you I was exaggerating. They would have made you doubt yourself. Tonight they showed you exactly who they are when they think they have all the power. Celeste made a small sound like a sob caught and forced back. Harper. Honey. Harper turned her head toward her mother with a look I'd never seen before. Not fear. Not pleading. A clean, hard clarity. Don't, she said. Not right now. Graham's voice rose again, desperate now. This is my company, he insisted, as if repeating it could make it true. You can't do this to me. I set the check down, then slid it back toward him. You tried to do it to your daughter, I said. You tried to do it to me. You just assumed I couldn't answer. I looked down at the envelope and the papers, then back at Elliot's voice humming on speaker, waiting. Elliot, I said, confirm what my voting position means. With Mr. Vale's 47% stake, Elliot replied, and with the proxy commitments already secured from additional shareholders, Mr. Vale can bring forward motions for leadership change and pass them with a majority vote at the board meeting. Graham's face changed again. The panic wasn't about money anymore. It was about losing the one thing he'd built his whole personality on: authority. Celeste's hands shook as she gripped her napkin like it could save her. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pulled up the email draft on my phone and hit send right there, right in front of them, so they could watch the consequences take shape. I called for an emergency board meeting Monday morning, I said. Agenda: a vote on the CEO's position and restructuring the executive team. I looked at Graham. I didn't activate any of this until tonight. Not until you turned dinner into coercion and made Harper's life collateral. Graham surged forward, furious. You'll destroy everything. No, I said. I'll save it from the way you've been running it. Same way I've been saving it for years. Then I lifted the check again, held it between my hands, and tore it cleanly in half. The rip was loud in the quiet room, like fabric tearing on a stage. I didn't do it to humiliate them. I did it to end the idea that our marriage had a price. I dropped the pieces onto the table like dead weight. Elliot, I said, my voice calm, proceed with all notifications. Understood, Elliot replied. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't social. It was the sound of an old order breaking. Harper stood there trembling with shock and anger and something like grief. I reached for her hand. She hesitated, then let me take it, not as forgiveness, but as an anchor. We turned and walked out of the Kingsley house together. Behind us, Graham and Celeste didn't follow. They couldn't. The stage they'd built had collapsed under them. In the car, Harper didn't speak for a long time. Austin's light streamed past the windshield, blurred by the moisture in her eyes. I kept both hands on the wheel, the same old interior, the same ordinary drive, as if normal could still exist after what just happened. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You didn't just change my parents," she said. "You changed everything I thought was true." I swallowed. "I know," I said, "and I'm here for what comes next." Harper stared out at the city for another long stretch of silence, and I understood with a clarity that scared me the next fight wasn't with Graham and Celeste. It was with the wound my silence had left inside my own marriage. And Monday morning wasn't just about removing a CEO. It was about rebuilding what Harper thought family meant from the ground up. Harper didn't sleep much that night. Neither did I. Back in our apartment, the familiar rooms felt smaller, not because the space had changed, but because the truth had expanded. She sat at the edge of the couch with her knees pulled up, staring at the dark TV screen like it might give her answers. I sat across from her, hands clasped, giving her the quiet she deserved. When she finally spoke, it wasn't angry. It was careful, like she was walking across glass. "How long," she asked, "have you been hiding it?" I didn't dodge. "Before I met you," I said. "I started buying into KLD years before your name meant anything to me." Her eyes narrowed. "So you didn't marry me for it?" "No," I said, and the word came out firm, almost aching. "I married you because you were the first person who looked at me like I didn't have to prove I belonged." Harper swallowed hard. "Then why keep it from me?" I took a breath, forcing myself to speak the whole truth instead of the convenient part. Because I was afraid I admitted. Not of you. Of what money does to certainty. If you knew too soon, you might spend the rest of your life wondering if I chose you because you were Harper or because you were a Kingsley. And I couldn't stand the idea of planting that doubt in you. "And what about me?" she said, voice breaking. "What about the years I spent worrying? The times I skipped things I wanted because I thought we needed to be careful. The times I felt guilty for having a family with money while you were, you know." I leaned forward. "That's on me," I said quietly. "I should have protected you from that stress. I thought I was protecting something pure, but I let you carry fear you didn't deserve." Harper's eyes filled. She wiped them fast, frustrated with herself for crying. "Did you do it to guide me?" she asked. "To make me see them as monsters?" "No," I said immediately. "I did it to keep our marriage from being about them at all. But I also needed you to see their control clearly, not through my interpretation. Tonight they proved it without help from me." Harper stared at me for a long moment, then reached across the space and took my hand. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but choice. I'm not okay right now," she whispered. "But I'm here. That's all I want," I said. "To keep choosing each other while we figure out the rest." Monday morning arrived sharp and clean, like the city had been scrubbed overnight. The headquarters of Kingsley Land and Development downtown looked like every modern temple to money glass steel, a lobby that smelled faintly of polished stone. The boardroom upstairs was worse. Long table, perfect chairs. A view of Austin that made the city look like it belonged to whoever sat at the head. Graham was already there when I walked in with Elliot. He looked smaller than he had at dinner, not physically but emotionally, as if he'd spent the night watching his life slip through his fingers. He tried to meet my eyes with the same intimidation he'd used on contractors and junior executives for years. It didn't land. I didn't come in smiling. I didn't come in to humiliate him. I came in like a man correcting something that had been allowed to run wrong for too long. Elliot distributed documents with the calm efficiency of someone who had prepared for this meeting long before it was scheduled. I took my seat without claiming the head of the table because power doesn't need theater. It needs leverage. Elliot spoke first, outlining the motion with precision. Interim leadership team. Review of high-risk projects. Governance reforms. Financial controls. A restructuring plan designed to stabilize KLD for the long term, rather than feed Graham's appetite for control. Board members glanced at Graham, then at the papers, then at me. Some of them had laughed at him in private for years. Some had feared him. All of them understood that the company's reputation was now tied to what happened next. Graham tried one last time to frame it as betrayal. "After everything I built," he said, voice tight, "you're going to strip me of my position because of a family disagreement." A woman at the far end of the table, someone who'd smiled through his meetings for years, finally spoke. "It's not a family disagreement," she said. "It's a pattern." Another board member nodded. "We've all had to manage around you," he added. "This just makes it official." Graham's face flushed. He looked around the room as if searching for an ally, and realized the allies he thought he had were people who'd been waiting for permission to stop pretending. The vote happened cleanly. No drama, no shouting. Numbers raised hands, and Graham lost. The motion passed with a wide majority. He was removed as CEO and offered a limited advisory role that preserved a sliver of dignity while stripping him of the control he'd abused. He sat there for a moment afterwards, staring at the table like he couldn't remember how to breathe. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The work was the point. Outside the building, my phone buzzed. Celeste. Then again. And again. Harper's phone buzzed too, back at the apartment, lighting up with missed calls she refused to answer. She needed space. She deserved it. By afternoon, a certified envelope arrived at our door. Harper stared at it for a long time before opening it like the paper itself carried poison. Inside was a letter from Celeste. The tone was different. No commands, no judgments, no important, just a mother's fear written plainly. Harper read it twice, then set it on the table with a hand that trembled. "She's scared," Harper said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "And sometimes fear is the first time people stop performing." Harper didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, looked out at our modest parking lot, the normal world moving past without knowing what had just shifted inside her. When she turned back, her voice was steady. "If they want a chance," she said, "it's on our terms." That Friday, Harper sent one message. Dinner at our place. No dress code, no script, no expectations. When Celeste and Graham arrived, they looked stripped of armor. Graham wore jeans and a plain sweater. Celeste wore slacks and minimal makeup, her hair pulled back like she didn't trust herself to hide behind styling anymore. They stepped into our apartment and seemed startled by how small it was, how real it was. No staff, no crystal, no stage lighting, just our life. We sat at our small table. Harper served pasta she'd made herself. The silence wasn't hostile, it was honest. Graham cleared his throat first. "Harper," he said, voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. "I owe you an apology." Harper didn't soften. She held his gaze. He continued anyway. "I treated your life like an asset I had to manage," he said. "I treated your marriage like an embarrassment I could erase. I was wrong." Celeste's eyes glistened. "I spent your whole life teaching you what a proper life looked like," she said, voice shaking. "And when you chose something different, I took it personally. I used social standards as a weapon. I thought control was love." Harper's hands clenched in her lap. "Love doesn't threaten my work," she said, voice quiet but sharp. "Love doesn't try to buy my husband off. Love doesn't ask a lawyer to wait in the hallway." Graham swallowed hard. "You're right," he said. "And I'm sorry." I let Harper speak first because this was her wound before it was mine. When she finished, I leaned forward slightly. "You get one chance," I said, calm and clear. "One. If you ever use money or influence to pressure Harper again, if you ever touch her non-profit support out of spite or control, I will cut your access to every lever you think you own. And I won't do it angrily. I'll do it clinically." Celeste nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We understand," she whispered. Harper looked at me then, and the pain was still there, but something else sat beside it. "Now resolve. And you," she said softly, turning to me. "We're not doing secrets like that again. I chose you. I'm choosing you. But I need us to be partners in reality too." I nodded. "No more hidden lives," I said. "No more letting you carry stress alone. We make decisions together. We plan together. We protect what we built together." Harper's shoulders loosened a fraction, like her body had been waiting to hear that promise. The dinner didn't end in instant forgiveness. It ended in boundaries, in truth, spoken without performance, in a path forward that wasn't guaranteed, but was real. Weeks later, we stayed in our apartment. We didn't move into a mansion. We didn't buy a flashy car. We bought the building instead of renting quietly because we wanted the stability without the show. We set up a foundation that funded Harper's programs in East Austin and scholarships for people who had talent but not access. We invested in community the way Harper always had, except now we could do it without begging donors who wanted control. Graham took the advisory role, and for the first time in his life had to contribute without ruling. Celeste learned how to show up as a mother rather than a curator of social image, and it was awkward and imperfect and sometimes painful, but it was real. One night months after that dinner, Harper and I stood on our small balcony looking at Austin's skyline, not as a prize, as a place where we'd built something honest. Harper leaned into me, her hand finding mine with less hesitation now. "Do you ever regret keeping it from me?" she asked. I exhaled slowly. "I regret the fear it put on you," I said. "I don't regret the reason. I wanted our love to exist before money tried to rewrite it." Harper nodded, eyes on the lights. "Then we do it differently from here," she said. "We do," I replied. And in that moment I understood the real victory wasn't $10 billion or a boardroom vote. It was this: we chose each other without being for sale, and we built a family defined by consent, not control. I used to think the hardest part of being underestimated was the humiliation. The way a room can decide who you are before you speak. The way someone's eyes can scan your wrist, your shoes, your car key, and turn you into a number they're comfortable dismissing. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was what it did to the person I loved. Watching Harper shrink inside her own family's expectations, watching her brace for impact every time a text came in that said important. Watching her carry guilt that never belonged to her because she thought her choices were causing me pain. I let myself be the target because I believed I could absorb it. I thought if I took the hits quietly, she wouldn't have to. And in some ways I was right. In other ways I was wrong in a way that still sits heavy in my chest. Because silence can look like strength, but it can also feel like abandonment to the person standing beside you. That's the part I'll keep learning from for the rest of my life. That dinner table in Westlake Hills was supposed to be their stage. They laid out the props, perfectly heavy silverware, the warm spotlight of chandelier light, the kind of polished wood that makes you feel like you shouldn't breathe too loudly. They believed the performance would force Harper back into alignment. They believed money would erase love the way it erases consequences. And I'll never forget how quickly power can evaporate the moment the truth enters the room. Not the emotional truth, not the messy truth people argue about. The factual truth. The kind you can file, the kind you can vote on, the kind that doesn't care how loudly you raise your voice. But here's what surprised me most after everything settled: the satisfaction wasn't in watching them collapse. It wasn't in the board vote or the calls or the stunned silence that followed my attorney's numbers. The satisfaction was in Harper's clarity. The moment she looked at her parents and didn't flinch. The moment she said, "Don't," and meant it. The moment she realized she didn't have to be anyone's obedient daughter to be worthy of love. That was the real win. Because the truth isn't meant to be a weapon. It's meant to be a foundation. And Harper finally got to stand on solid ground. If you're listening to me right now and you've ever been the person at the table that nobody bothered to learn about, if you've ever been judged by your job title, your zip code, your last name, your bank balance, the car you drive, then I need you to hear this clearly. Being underestimated hurts, but it also reveals things nothing else can. It reveals who only respects power and who respects people. It reveals who can love you when you're ordinary, and who only wants the version of you that benefits them. It reveals who sees relationships as contracts and who sees them as commitments. And once you see that you can stop negotiating your worth with people who never intended to value you in the first place. I also want to say something that a lot of stories like this skip over because it's not as cinematic as the big reveal. Money didn't save my marriage. Money didn't heal Harper's wounds. Money didn't magically turn her parents into better people. What saved us was a choice we made long before anyone knew the truth. We chose each other in the quiet. We chose the modest apartment. We chose the normal life. We chose the hard conversations that didn't come with applause. We chose to build something real while everyone else was busy building an image. And if there's any lesson in all of this worth carrying forward, it's that your life becomes unbreakable when it's built on values instead of validation. Harper and I still have work to do. That part is real too. Trust doesn't rebuild itself overnight even when the intentions were good. Healing isn't a switch you flip after a dramatic moment. It's repetition. It's transparency. It's showing up again and again, especially when it's uncomfortable. It's letting the person you love ask the hard questions and answering them without defensiveness. It's making new agreements, not just apologizing for old mistakes. And I'm telling you that because I don't want this to feel like a fairy tale where the ending is a neat bow. The ending is a door we chose to walk through together. So here's my question for you, and I mean it sincerely. Have you ever been in a room where you knew they'd already decided you were less than before you even spoke? Have you ever been treated like an obstacle to someone's plan? Have you ever had to fight for the right to live your own life, not the life someone else designed for you? If you have, I want you to do something simple right now. Comment just one word. Listening. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'm not asking because I want numbers. I'm asking because stories like this can make you feel isolated, like you're the only one who has ever sat through that kind of pressure with your stomach in knots. And you're not. Sometimes the smallest connection, one comment, one shared location, one I get, it can make the whole weight of it feel lighter. And if you're still here with me, if you've made it this far, then I also want to ask you for something else. Subscribe. Not because I'm chasing a milestone, but because the kind of stories we tell here are for people who have lived through something. People who know what it means to be doubted, dismissed, cornered, controlled, or quietly humiliated and still choose integrity instead of becoming cruel. This channel is a place for the ones who didn't get handed respect, who had to earn it, and who are learning that the best kind of victory isn't destruction. It's growth. It's boundaries. It's building a life so solid that nobody else gets to shake it. When you subscribe, you're not just following content. You're choosing a space where character matters more than status, where power is measured by self-control, not intimidation, where love isn't a bargaining chip, where people don't get to rewrite your story because they think they own the pen. And if you've ever needed a reminder that you're allowed to stand up for yourself quietly, firmly, without theatrics, then you belong here. Because I'm going to keep sharing the moments that taught me that strength doesn't have to be loud and dignity doesn't require permission. Hit the like button too if any part of this landed in your chest the way it landed in mine. It tells me you want more of this. More real stories, more hard-earned lessons, more proof that you can survive being underestimated and still come out kind, still come out whole. And if you know someone who is living in a family dynamic that feels like control dressed up as love, share this with them. Not to start a fight, to start a thought. Sometimes one story is the first crack in a wall someone's been trapped behind for years. I'm Cassian Vale. I'm the man they tried to buy off at a dinner table like I was disposable. I'm also the man who learned that the truest wealth isn't $10 billion in shares. It's the ability to look at the person you love and say, I choose you, and mean it even when it costs you comfort, even when it forces you to confront people you once wanted to please. It's the freedom to live simply because you want to, not because you have to. It's the courage to draw a line not out of hatred but out of respect for the life you're building. And it's the peace that comes when you stop trying to win approval from people who only understand power. So if you're here, if you're listening, if any part of this reminded you of your own life, let me know in the comments. Say listening. Tell me your city. Tell me the moment you realized you were done being small for someone else's comfort. I read more than you think, and I carry these stories with me because this isn't just entertainment. It's a reminder. A reminder that you're not crazy for wanting respect. You're not selfish for setting boundaries. You're not weak for feeling hurt. And you're not alone. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for giving this story a place to land. And if you want more stories about justice, redemption, and the quiet satisfaction of people finally seeing what they dismissed, subscribe now, because the next one might sound different on the surface, but it'll hit the same truth. The most dangerous person in any room is often the one everyone is ignoring. Not because they're plotting revenge, because they're building strength in silence. And one day when it matters, they stop whispering and start speaking in facts. If you stayed with me to the very end, thank you. After all the numbers and the shock, what lingers for me isn't the 10 billion. It's the moment we stop treating people like price tags. Tonight reminded me that in every family, in every room, Chungta are all carrying something: pride, fear, old expectations, and sometimes the people who hurt us are also the ones who don't know how to love without control. That doesn't excuse it. It just explains why kindness and boundaries have to exist together. If any part of this felt familiar, Ban aren't alone. And if you want, leave a few lines in the comments where Ban are listening from a time ban were underestimated, or the boundary ban wish you'd drawn sooner. I read more than you think, and I'm grateful for every story shared here. And if Ban would like to be part of this little corner where we listen without judging and heal without pretending, you can subscribe and stay with us. I'm Cassian. Thanks for letting me sit with Ban for a while. Take care, and I'll see Ban in the next story.